I would like to welcome you here at another session of the Inspiration Forum, which is dedicated to artificial intelligence. And we spoke about what AI is, what it is capable to do, and how it can impact the labor market. And now we will talk about how to regulate artificial intelligence within the European Union. We have here 4 guests. First of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Klára Votavová. I am an analyst at the think tank European. I'm also a journalist and I'm interested into digital technologies. I also would like to welcome here 3 guests that are present here in the studio. We have here Heda Čepelová, which is a political analyst. Good evening. Next to her, we have a human rights lawyer, Monika Hanych, who leads the Czech delegation to the Council of Europe Committee on Artificial Intelligence. And the last present guest is Hajira Maryam. She represents here Amnesty International, where she participates in Algorithmic Accountability Lab, and she studies how artificial intelligence can discriminate vulnerable workers and vulnerable groups. And last but not least, we also have another guest, Luca Bertuzzi. I would like to welcome him here. He is an editor of the Belgian Euroactive, and he specializes on digital policy within European matters. So he is very well aware of everything that happens within the European Commission and European Parliament. 6 years ago, we had another session about fake news with him, so I'm very happy to see him again. Thank you for connecting. I also would like to tell you what the debate will look like. It will not be different from other debates. First of all, we will have some 60 minutes to talk among us, and then we will open the discussion to the audience as well. So, without further ado, we will start with our questions. If you feel you have something to say or to comment on, feel free to speak, and you are not obliged to do so if you don't want to comment on a particular topic. The topic of this session is the regulation within the European Union when it comes to artificial intelligence. So, why does the European Union, since 2019, under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, why does it regulate artificial intelligence? Hajira, you can start if you want.
Okay, I hope this is working. Basically, the European Commission proposed the AI Act in 2021, and one of the most fundamental things about the AI Act right now, it is actually the first ever comprehensive global regulation on AI. And through this, the EU is actually trying to ensure transparency and accountability when it comes to technologies, that use and implement artificial intelligence in their systems. And at the same time, the EU is trying to propose a very human rights-centric approach as well, so to ensure that it's not automation that is deciding the outcome when and where, when these systems are implemented, especially when it comes to decisions that are made in the welfare space. For instance, I'm sure many of you know about the Dutch child benefit scandal, that kind of exploded in the Netherlands, and then how basically an AI system that was implemented over there to detect people who were committing fraud when applying for child welfare benefits, it was racist against marginalized communities. So I think so there have been a couple of examples in the past globally, yeah, so I think this is one of the most fundamental pillars as well, looking at from a very human rights centric space when it comes to AI accountability and regulation. And Amnesty International, along with civil society groups led by European Digital Rights Network, is also advocating, for for an extremely human rights centric AI Act at this point.
Okay, ještě se možná zeptám Moniky.
Okay, I would also like to ask Monika to comment on the sources of this European regulation in the international context. Good evening. Thank you very much for the introduction made by Hajira. Myself, I work at the Council of Europe, which is a different European body, and I'm sure you all heard about it during your studies. This is a separate institution from the European Union. It has 46 member countries. It used to be 47, but nowadays Russia is no longer a member country because of the geopolitical situation. So today we are not talking only about the European AI Act, but within the Council of Europe since 2018 we've been working on this topic. We've been talking about a new international agreement which would be global. This is what differentiates it from the European AI Act. This is global. It can bind more countries than the EU AI Act, which binds only 27 countries. The Council of Europe has 46 member countries, but the agreement can be accepted also by other countries which are not member countries. So currently there are about 60 countries discussing this agreement, including United States, Japan, Israel, Canada, and so on. So this is just to place it into a certain context. European regulation is one of the pillars of regulation when it comes to artificial intelligence, but it is much more global than just the EU countries. And we are also trying to focus the topic of human rights, but at the same time we are focusing on the EU market. On the other hand, the Council of Europe defines some basic principles, and it's up to the individual states to amend and implement these, and it can be also by using the EU AI Act. So now I would like to proceed with the topic of the European Union AI Act, and I would like to ask Luca if he can introduce us what this AI Act is, when it was proposed, what is the current status of this act. So please, Luca, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Klára, and apologies from not being there in person. Good evening to everyone from Brussels. So just to give a bit of context, in the last mandate, we had for the first time digital policy taking center stage at the EU level. And the overall approach of this commission was that we want technologies, but we want them at our own terms. So containing risks and maximizing benefits for EU citizens. And what we have seen with the AI Act is following precisely this approach. It's actually a product safety regulation, so it's following a very old school type of legislation from a EU legislative perspective, and it follows a risk-based approach. You basically have most AI applications that won't have any particular requirement because they don't entail particular risks. If you think about your spam filters of your mailbox, for example. But then for systems that pose a significant risk, perhaps because it's It's a system that determines if you get a job or not, or if you get an operation or not. Then this system have to undergo a specific regime of risk management and data management, and you need to sort of prove that your system is robust enough not to harm people. And finally, there are systems, AI applications that are considered posing unacceptable risk. If you think about social scoring that is present in China, for example. Now, all of these, what is high risk, what is unacceptable risk, are political decisions, and they are at the center of the discussion now. We are in the last phase of the legislative process, so EU policymakers will probably reach an agreement by December. Which means that this legislation will enter into place in 1-2 years. Then it takes time, of course, for the market to adapt. But let me just give you a bit of sense of how the mood has changed, because I've been following this law since it was first proposed in April 2021. And at the time, there was not so much attention. And actually, the narrative was, why are you doing this? It's too early, this market doesn't exist yet. And then after ChatGPT, you have attention from all global media outlets, and the narrative is, oh, you're too late, you're not moving fast enough. So I think that, the legislative process takes its time. It's also, democracy takes its time. But I think we are finally getting there. And one final thing worth mentioning, precisely related to ChatGPT, is that the understanding at the EU level has matured in the sense that not all AI systems are equally powerful. There are some very powerful AI systems on which other AI solutions and applications can be built. And these, you can call them frontier models, you can call them foundation models, general purpose AI. There is not a fixed terminology yet, and this doesn't help the understanding, I think. But there is a shared sense that these very powerful models need to be regulated in a specific way that helps economic actors that are down in the value chain to comply with the legislative requirements.
Děkuji Lukovi. Myslím, že tady je docela důležité zdůraznit ten časový kontext.
Thank you, Luca. We must focus on the time frame, I think.
Centrální evropská regulace, AI Act,
this central regulation was proposed in 2021 by the European Commission, which was a year and a half before ChatGPT and other generative models, which are able to generate text and images. You have all played with it, I guess. So the AI Act, was it able to respond to this? Since it was already undergoing ongoing negotiation, and will it be sufficient to prevent misuse of generative AI, or will we need a new regulation? Heda, you have the floor. So let me follow up on this, because I think that the time frame is important. The context is important. It's one of my first comments that I wrote down here. The AI Act is one of 144 regulations that have applied to the internet. These documents were applying to protection of people. You all remember GDPR. There are so many. There are over 100 of them. So I think that it's quite clear to me that
if the EU decided at one moment to regulate digital activities, it concluded that there are also artificial intelligence tools, and they existed even before ChatGPT. And since there is the AI Act, well, that's because the EU said, okay, this is just too overwhelming. We must frame this within legislation. So then that was even before ChatGPT appeared. And then ChatGPT appeared, and it attracted a lot of attention to this topic. And it's the effect of the plane that falls down. You start to focus on the safety of flying when planes start crashing. And then it raises the questions that it's important, that it's costly, and that many people die. So you must improve security standards. This same applies to ChatGPT. ChatGPT is efficient, it plays with language, and it shows us that these tools can be creative. So we should start regulating and adopt some kind of standards. And paradoxically, before that, we were also regulating, but we were not paying attention to it. And we are also regulating because we are focusing on climate change at the same time. And as one analyst of new media commented, well, you need new technologies to be able to face climate change. He speaks about twin transition, and when you read all these technological climate regulations, this is what you find often. To be able to reduce emissions, we need new rules for massive innovation, and these innovations often include digital solutions because digital solutions allow us to respond quickly. These technologies allow us to respond to everything in real time. This is irreplaceable. This is an aspect of digital technologies which is irreplaceable. This also applies to AIs. This is why we are doing it, because we want to face this huge climate challenge. So I'd like to hear from you whether this AI Act has already been able to take ChatGPT into account. Because for me, this is an example of to what extent regulation is in line with development of technologies. Hajira?
So I'm noticing something here, and I feel like I should really raise a point over here. The whole problem right now, also when we are talking about AI and AI Act, I'm seeing that it's always being condensed down just to ChatGPT. And this is the biggest core problem that we are having in the debate right now globally, even in the media level, so to speak. Luca, I know you're a journalist, but also like in the global discourse. And as at Amnesty, like for instance, at the moment, like for instance, we are seeing next week that UK is going to have its AI UK summit, and the global tech leaders and governments are quote ChatGPT and large language models, and then they think of AI as posing this existential threats. But in reality, in ground reality, AI has already been impacting people for over a decade. For instance, when artificial intelligence and facial recognition systems are used for mass surveillance, it really hampers your freedom of expression and freedom of opinion. At Amnesty International, we have done research where we have identified that how mass surveillance and facial recognition technology, when it was being used in New York City, it was actually mistargeting Black and brown people more so. So there is already coded bias in AI that is existing at this point. And then at the same time, I started my chat about talking about automation and risk assessment system and social scoring. And now, coded bias also exists over there. And as we saw what happened in the Netherlands, that, for instance, the fact that if you speak Dutch fluently, your nationality, your background, if you had a dual national, if you were a single person, the child benefit system that was used by the Dutch the Dutch tax administration would automatically increase your risk score. So a lot of people and a lot of families who were already marginalized fell greater into marginalization. So I think it kind of does become problematic when we look at AI and the AI Act only from the ChatGPT framework, because yeah, AI has been implemented throughout. One other thing that the civil society is calling in the AI Act is banning of exports. So for instance, if any harmful AI technology is banned in the EU, it should not be exported outside of the EU. One example is that how companies in the EU, they export technology to Israel, which is then used for mass surveillance in occupied Palestinian territories. And it kind of really, has this, it's already an existential threat. It's not going to be an existential threat in the future. I hope, yeah, I was clear about all of that.
Jenom pokud to můžu trošku doplnit.
Let me add one thing from the point of view of regulation. This doesn't mean that regulating AI the regulation starts from scrap. It doesn't mean whether the day doesn't mean anything. 2021, it doesn't mean anything. The existing regulation applies to these systems already. So in transportation, healthcare, social networks, we already have different pieces of regulation that already apply, but what is the added value? Well, AI, aside from existing regulations, which would have to be bent, there are some loopholes, or there would be some legal vacuum. This actually fills this legal vacuum. So if there are some AI developers here and they think, well, there is no regulation applying to us yet because it hasn't been approved either in the EU or by the Council of Europe. This is not true because we have civil liability, for example. But this technology is just so advanced that it brings other challenges, and we must address these challenges. So this is just for the context. Okay, thank you. Let me move on to social sciences and how it can be applied, but now I'd like to speak about implementation, either of AI, the AI Act, or other pieces of regulation, because I think that this is a huge issue on the European level. We adopt some kind of regulation, but then the state, on a state level, the state is unable to enforce it. So who would like to start? Luca, maybe you could explain this. Is this a part of the AI Act, and what is your experience, for example, with the GDPR?
Yeah, so actually I would like to link this to the previous question. So if you take generative AI is not a particularly new technology. It has been around for 10 years. If you think about your filters on Instagram, they're also generative AI. What is unprecedented is the scale that we have seen with ChatGPT. So it's not ChatGPT, the real groundbreaking technology, is how good the foundation model behind ChatGPT is, which is GPT-4 now. So what this tells us is that not only it disrupted the negotiations on the AI Act, because this was not considered when it was originally conceived, but also that we need a governance model that is able to keep up with that technology that advances of an entire generation in only a few months. There are now discussions of creating an AI office at the EU level. Originally, the AI Act only envisaged a national market surveillance authority in charge of enforcement. It's actually a good thing that we are finally talking about a centralized enforcement, which is pretty much missing in the GDPR. But I agree with you, Klára, that this has often been a weak point in EU legislation. The EU likes to think itself as the global regulator, but so far its enforcement powers have not kept up with that ambition. and to enforce on some of the the wealthiest companies in the world, you need expertise that is not so much available on the market. You need data scientists, computer scientists, and you need to make EU institutions attractive for this sort of employees. So I think this will be the big challenge in a few years once the AI Act has become law.
Thank you, Luca. And maybe Heda, if you can.
I just only have to repeat that the Czech implementation context will be similar to the European context, because if we look at the European digital governments, there is DSA, DMA, these two regulations, Digital Services Act and which apply to platforms on the market, that there is competition, and then there is the operation of these platforms, what you can do there and what they can delete. So these two pieces of regulation already are in force, even though not many people don't know about it. And there are also some agencies, local agencies, and we will see who will do this, the Ministry of Industry or the Ministry of the Interior. They will split, these authorities will split the task, and you will even not notice, because the center of all these activities will be in the EU. And so far, the result of digital governance in the EU is what is going to happen on the European market with social networks, because it's being discussed currently that whether Twitter will stay in the EU, whether it will be free of charge, or whether it will be paid. Then Facebook before was threatening to withdraw from the European market. And this is happening because of European digital governance, because since 2014, the European Union is saying that it's not good to leave data unprotected, but this goes against the business model of those platforms. And these platforms says, okay, if you take this business model from us and we cannot capitalize on these data, we must look for other business models. So Twitter will be paid. And I think that for AI Act, it will be the same. So the EU, using its market, will push these big operators to do some things. And here in the Czech Republic, we will not do much about it. We will have a notifying agency, for example, if someone is developing an AI here at the university in Prague, it will have to be notified, and we will have to say that it's human-centric, that it's not manipulative, and data are processed. But I think that I don't think that we will have a ministry for AI in the Czech Republic. I think that here in the Czech Republic, we do not see the EU as part of our governance. But in this matter, this is how we should see it, because Czech authorities regulating AI differently than the EU, that's absurd. Because even EU institutions are having a hard time to find competent staff.
I would like to come back to what Luca said. I mentioned GPT because I wanted to show that this debate has been moving forward really quickly, and that the regulation isn't keeping up with the development. But what I found interesting about what Luca said was that we need to do this more efficiently, that we need to change the model of governance. So maybe Luca, can you tell us how we can change it to make it functional?
Well, I mean, this comes from people that are much better prepared than me, but the AI office should be empowered to sort of adapt to new technological developments, to adapt the criteria for assessing if something poses a significant risk, and to adjust the requirements accordingly. This is a level of flexibility that is not very common in EU legislation. It's actually, you don't see it at all. And this will be the challenge, because I was saying before, this law follows rather traditional product safety legislation. but you cannot regulate AI as you regulate toys. You need something that adapts to the new reality. Otherwise, it will become overwhelmed. And you know, when we talk about companies having to adjust to EU rules, well, they will do that only if they know that EU authorities can bite. And if they know that the EU takes enforcement seriously. So I think otherwise we risk another GDPR debacle, where we have raised a lot of expectations around the law, and then took the governance and enforcement as an afterthought.
Thank you. Now I would like to move to the application. And I picked two areas that are kind of controversial when it comes to AI. The first aspect are the social matters, let's say, division of social benefits, as Hajira mentioned, for example. And then the second aspect is defense matters. This is just an example. We don't have to talk only about these, but what I understand is that the EU AI Act was very controversial when it comes to defense matters. The Commission of the European Union didn't really want to get security involved in the act. They wanted to ban the so-called predictive policing, for example. So what is your opinion when it comes to the usage of artificial intelligence in defense matters and security matters? And is it functional or not in its current state?
Thank you so much. I can't really go into the nitty-gritty of, you know, AI being used in defense and warfare, because we actually have another campaign called Stop Killer Robots, and we have experts on that. But one thing I really want to highlight is there is a huge power imbalance when we are talking about AI regulation and the AI Act. And this power imbalance is actually, you know, on one side, we have EU lawmakers who admit that they don't understand artificial intelligence. And then, you know, they rely on big tech, who I call the tech bros, you know, to kind of define the standards as well. And then on the other side, you have impacted communities and the marginalized groups who literally, you know, and as the civil society, who are never really considered for opinion. And now speaking about national security, like, so I'll come to your point. What I mean is, the whole issue, and you know, I'm more looking at this from like more like a narrative and a discourse and framing on the wider like how the knowledge is disseminated to wider public. So when it comes to national security, you know, as I think you highlighted that they're not really interested on regulation in that front. And you know, when they're not interested, that also means they are also kind of escaping from accountability and transparency. And you know, whenever you know, these sort of rules and procedures are set in the name of national security to like look for terrorists, quote unquote, and to look for criminals, in the end, you know, these type of systems, and so to the omnipresent, you know, societal makeup of these systems under the guise of national security, so to speak, in the end, it actually does more harm than good for people who are already facing a lot of persecution and marginalization in society. So that's how basically we look at it, that first of all, because even right now with the whole hype around AI among policymakers, they always forefront the national security discourse. They try to be defensive about it, and then at the same time, what's really happening is people who are already, at the brink of, who are facing a lot of discrimination in societies are kind of, completely impacted. And then the governments and the lawmakers are escaping from transparency and accountability. There are no remedies, no reparations, so on and so forth. So that's how, we look at it from a civil society perspective.
Yeah, ještě bych se zeptala Moniky, může říct něco?
Now I would like to give the floor to Monika to describe the stand of the Council of Europe.
Jenom vlastně zase doplním i k
I just would like to comment on the European Union legislation, and I'm not a specialist when it comes to EU legislation. We can talk about several terms, and we need to differentiate between those. We have three terms. For defense, it is military defense and national security. So that means defending state, basically, and national security. And when you look at the founding acts of the European Union, you see that the common European competence isn't included. They can focus only on national security. So if you communicate with your representatives, you can definitely push them to regulate the usage of AI within the military matters and so on. But I don't think you will be successful. When it comes to the Council of Europe, it is kind of similar. We can treat the topic of national security, of defense matters, but I want to mention here an example. I would like to ask you a question, kind of to wake you up, because I can't see you because of the lighting here on the stage. So there was a system which was a face recognition system at the Prague airport, and it was implemented to identify international terrorists. So in real time, you were passing through the security check, and you were identified by this face recognition software, and you might have been forced to do additional checkup. It took 2 years, and now I would like to ask you, do you believe they were able to capture, to identify at least one terrorist? So there are 2 people who are not sleeping, but unfortunately, no, they were not able to catch any terrorists. They stopped several hundreds of people for additional checks. But this is a real threat. It is face recognition. They are saving the data, even though they claimed they are deleting the data immediately. But this was run by the Prague airport. It was not run by the state. It was run by a private entity. So there was no supervision about what happens with the data and so on. So this definitely leaves space for some regulation. I just would like to comment on this. Now we have heard what is the role of a state, because the Czech governance might be to avoid applying this act, to avoid applying the regulation.
Monika, thank you so much for highlighting that example. And with that, I'll give my background. I'm from Pakistan, and I'm a Muslim woman. So, the scrutiny at times I face at EU airports is like, I don't even want to describe it. This is my personal experience. But anyway, coming to the point of national security, and then, Monika rightly pointed out on, and capturing terrorists and criminals, this whole emblem. And one more thing I want to highlight is how, under the guise of national security, like how AI technologies are being implemented at borders and pushback operations, chasing down refugees and asylum seekers, using emotion recognition systems as well. And And what I'm also seeing at the moment, and we are also at Amnesty, we're seeing at the moment that there is like a huge double standard when it comes to AI regulation and AI Act as well. Nobody's talking, we haven't seen much attention being paid to technologies, AI technologies being used in borders in the AI Act. And this just shows the whole core of the problem, the double standard approach. There is a thing called Brussels effect, right? And it is the EU. So it's more like the lawmakers, they do care about citizens in the EU countries whatsoever, but then at the same time, no importance is being given to how these really oppressive AI systems is used against migrants and refugees, chasing them with drones whatsoever, using emotion recognition systems as experimental measures that literally have, no, how do I explain it in the best terms, no capacity to be accurate, so to speak. And these double standards are very, very important to address in the AI Act right now. I do understand that we are focusing more on the EU and lots of governments, but at the same time, there are people from the global majority who face first-right impacts of these technologies in the EU as well, and that is not being addressed.
Děkuji, Hajira. Ještě... Pardon?
Yeah,
Luca, please, go on.
Yeah, no, I think there are two aspects here. So the first one is whether the technology actually works. And if you take emotion recognition technology, most of the evidence says that it's a pseudoscience, which does not actually lead to objective results. And I mean, the example of the airport was also pointing at the fact that these systems are not very effective at the moment. But at an even more basic level, this question relates to what kind of society we want to be. And there is always a tension, of course, between security and freedom. And this tension we see also between the EU institutions, where actually immigration control, law enforcement are big topics of debate. Between the EU Council, where the member states are pushing for stronger exemptions for the security forces, and MEPs that are pushing for a more protective approach of citizens or migrants, and even the introduction of a fundamental rights impact assessment. This, though, is different from national security, which is outside the EU treaties. But it should be said that also in the context of the Council of Europe Treaty, you have pretty much the same countries, namely France, pushing for a national security exemption there too. So, I mean, it's the same people pushing the same agenda, and it's a political decision, really. As a journalist, I look at it more from an objective point of view, trying to find the points of view of both stakeholders. But it's a tension that will probably determine a lot of how our society will look like in a few years.
Thank you, Luca. This was, I think, an important summary of what we have heard. I know that each topic would really deserve 2 hours of discussion, but let's move on to social affairs, using algorithms at work, or using algorithms in education or in public services when you award benefits and stuff like that. Is this a topic which is also addressed by the EU AI Act, and is it sufficient, or is there a different piece of regulation addressing this? We can start with Luca again to introduce this topic.
Yeah, so again, this area is one considered at significant risk. And we have seen interesting proposals from the center left in the parliament to introduce even more protection for workers occurs when, for example, an AI is used. They would have the right to negotiate or at least be aware of what it is used for, and also to possibly negotiate through their trade unions. So this is a big area of negotiations in the AI Act, but to be honest, it's such an horizontal law that it will virtually impact every domain of people's life, that it's very difficult to understand now how AI will impact people's lives in just a few years. So I think, again, it's going back to the governance. Maybe we will, the policymakers will agree to certain protections, and then we will have another application that we didn't think about before. And then the protection will be outdated in a very short time. So yeah, how to do that, it's very complicated.
Kdokoliv by se chtěl vyjádřit vlastně k sociálním tématům?
Anyone else would like to speak about the social aspects of the EU AI Act? So, from the point of view of the Council of Europe, because this affects us as well, in violating human rights, social rights, for example, that's also part of human rights, we must say that there is the European Convention of Human Rights, which is applied by the court in Strasbourg. Since 1959, this court has been applying the same convention, and there are only 18 articles in this convention. And there is, for example, the right to have private and family life. And you would think this is enough. And in 1959, they didn't even consider climate change or new technologies, because at the time there were these huge computers that filled up a whole room. So that the regulation that comes from the Council of Europe now does not focus on detail. It focuses on different areas and on human rights. So if the system of artificial intelligence does not pose any risks, if it does things which do not harm you, do not violate your human rights, the regulation does not apply to it. So it's good to know that each and every system is not regulated. If it's doing something not complicated, it is helping you to select the color of your clothes, for example. This is not regulated. But when you are at work and you are applying for a job, but you do not succeed, and then later on you find out that it was assessed by an AI system without any justification, it turns out that Amazon were selecting people based on their looks. So for IT teams, they were selecting white men, and even if other people with different color of skin had the same skills, they were not selected. Then of course regulation comes into play and can be applied. So this was just a brief comment. I could speak 30 minutes about this. I just wanted to add that this is true, but sometimes it takes a lot of time to really have human rights protected. It's not a quick process. In the meantime, bad things can happen. If someone defending climate change was sitting here, they would be saying, yes, it takes time and bad things are happening. We should go back to what we said at the beginning. What is the context of this? Why are we addressing AI? There is this human rights issue, which says that deep learning, if it applies on people, if we are processing people, that's a violation of human rights. But if it applies, for example, to data on energy consumption, then it's useful. So now we must regulate regulate it in the following way. We must be able to use it efficiently, which means, for example, that you will have an efficient measurement device of your energy consumption. It will help you to consume energy better, and that's smart application, which is okay. And this is not processing people, let's say, not directly. But then there are other examples, like that airport, where it applies to people. It applies to individual, to its human aspect, and this is not what we want. So the AI Act does not say clearly green things are good and human rights things are bad. No, that's not part of the AI Act. But the AI Act, that's not about human rights protection. It's about the single market. I have a comment. Well, the EU always wants to find consensus between many conflicting camps, so liberalization of the market and protection of workers. So it's a lot of things that we must find compromise between. Marian Jurečka, our former minister, wanted to digitalize our social benefit system here in the Czech Republic, and now we want to reduce administrative burden, and digitalization also can mean negative things. So now we are moving on to the end of our debate before I open the floor to the audience. Last huge topic that I would like to open is the following: geopolitics. I see that the EU is lagging behind in this technological race, and it's over-regulating the technologies are coming from other countries of the world. This is what I often hear. So this is about geopolitics versus human rights in the EU or solidarity point of view. How is this discussion going to develop in the EU between the various camps in the European Parliament? So maybe Luca, you could address this question.
Yeah, so when we talk about regulation, the usual division we see is, especially in the European Parliament, is conservative forces usually want to reduce the administrative burden for businesses, whereas progressive forces are more focused on consumer protection and fundamental rights. So it's a matter of political priorities, really. Now, when it comes to the AI Act, I would say there are two aspects to consider. The first one is legal certainty. There are a lot of AI developers that are looking at the AI Act with interest because this is such an important technology that sooner or later you can expect regulation. And as a first mover advantage, the EU will probably set the international standards. Now, that will, of course, depend on how seriously they will enforce it as per the GDPR. But also via the Treaty of the Council of Europe, this can become de facto the international law on AI, unless developers decide to split their AI system and create a different system for the EU and the rest of the world, which has not happened in the past, but you never know. Secondly, you need to consider the administrative burden for SMEs. And this is going to be very significant. This is already the case that when you look at startups in Europe, they prefer to go out of Europe, usually to the US, develop, and then come back to the European market, because there is not a single market in Europe. There are 27 markets. And the administrative law, the employment law is different in each, and that does not help startups that want to scale up. And when you look at how much money it will mean for companies to put in place a risk management system, it's clear that you create an entry barrier. So every time you sorry, can you still see me?
I think now it works probably.
Yeah, sorry. Just to conclude, I wanted to say that every time you introduce a legislation, there is an administrative cost, and you also have to consider that you might favor the biggest actors that have more money to comply.
OK, možná bych to ještě trošičku posunula. Tak mně přijde, že vlastně řešení tady...
Maybe I would like to follow up on this comment. Is there a solution other? Because if Europe decides to regulate AI, it will most likely end up with a global regulation. So do you have information about how it approaches in OECD or the Council of Europe, if it is possible to reach a global consensus, which is becoming more and more negative towards this matter?
Global consensus, that is a very, very loaded question. I mean, global consensus from the perspective of only Western countries is what we are defining global perspective, or are we also including the global majority, which is South Asia, Central Asia, Africa? It's hard because right now what we are observing is in this entire race to regulate AI, you are seeing quite key players like the US, the UK, then the EU, then of course there's China, but I mean, I'm not going to talk about China right now. We talk a lot about China in the EU. So it's difficult, like, we need to question who is really setting the standard over here. Because even when we talk about AI, I think one thing that is completely missing right now is exploitation of AI. There was this really interesting investigation, which was, I think, out in Time, that Time magazine or outlet, that how workers in Kenya were being exploited. And I think this is a massive, big gap that we are seeing, and this is what happened with big tech as well. I mean, look at Meta, look at the way content moderation is done. They do not account for all the languages when it comes to content moderation. So I feel it's a very difficult question when we are talking about reaching consensus for global regulation. But the other point I also want to raise is that the entire big tech lobbying that is also involved when we are talking about this global debate. If you're going to have people like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg sitting in a round table with you, at the same time defining and trying to water down the AI Act as well, because especially when it comes to high-risk classification, basically it said the deployers themselves, right now, some muddling is happening that deployers themselves get to decide if their systems that they're selling are high risk or not. It's kind of asking a racist person if they're racist or not, in my opinion. So, if you're getting all these big tech bros into the picture with, the global north and trying to reach a consensus over there, it's very difficult, so to speak. So we need to avoid the global double standards. We really do. If in the AI Act, for instance, if the EU is planning to ban harmful AI systems, they shouldn't be exporting, technologies, because, our research has shown that as well that EU exports. We talk so much about China, but let's not forget companies in the EU are exporting surveillance technologies to China, which is actually being used to target, which is we are seeing that they're being used to target Uyghurs. So, there are always these double standards in approach, and I think that is the first question that we need to ask if we are talking about global consensus.
Jo, já za tenhle point děkuji, mně přijde hrozně zajímavý.
Thank you very much for mentioning this.
Ten model nějakého
I think it's very interesting how the model of exploitation is present also in digital technologies. We often forget about this. And I also would like to mention that we have already heard about the Kenya workers working on content moderation today. Monika, would you like to comment on the international agreements or discussion of this matter? Is it possible to reach a global consensus? Because myself, I think that there is a rather fierce debate and it's really kind of hopeless from my point of view. Thank you. I just would like to add a few comments. First of all, I think international discussion between many states is not easy. There are many people in this room and there can be as many states sitting at the table. And if we ask you now to pick one restaurant to go to have a dinner, you will not be able to pick one because you have various preferences, and it works the same with the states. States have different views, different cultures, different legal systems, and different preferences. So reaching a consensus is never simple. When it comes to regulation, or let me come back to the fees debate, yes, currently we are almost able to complete our work with our advisory board. It should complete the work till the end of March or April next year. And yes, the deadline is approaching, it's close, and more states are becoming more and more active because in the past the individual states didn't know what they want, and now they are aware of the importance of the matter and they are bringing new and new requirements to the table. So definitely yes, there can be some competition or negative feelings towards each other. That's true, but the Council of Europe has the force, the power of an international institution. And it is an independent institution. And it provides space for states to communicate. And they try to reach a certain consensus. And here I am hinting because there is a representative of the United States sitting in the same room as the representatives of the European Union. And they are trying to agree on something. They are trying to present 5 possibilities and then to agree on some of these. And this is how the world works. First of all, we need to analyze what we have, and only later we can regulate, we can create regulation. It's the same with AI. First of all, we need to make some research, and only then we can come with regulation. And my last remark is related to human rights. It is true that in Europe we have the highest standard of human rights protection. It can be costly, it can be more difficult when it comes to identifying terrorists or criminals, but we have a system where we are balancing the individual interests, such as security and privacy protection. We are asking the questions: what is acceptable from the point of view of privacy protection? We have CCTV cameras that are collecting data, and in public spaces we have this kind of surveillance. And this is what we are able to do in order to feel safe. Another point point is that, yes, this can cause some obstacles to businesses, but it is a question of the policy and governance, and we have to decide which way we want to pick. There are various paths, and it is really not my job. What I try to do is to identify the high-risk AI system, to identify where they can breach human rights. Because if they do, then citizens will be coming to us and asking, what did the international community do in order to prevent this? So that's just an explanation. So now we should move to this. Okay, now I would like to give the floor to the audience to ask. I know it's a very complex topic, you have a lot of comments, but please, we would like to give the floor to the audience. There is one question in the first row. Feel free to name the person you want to ask. This is directed to everybody. It's a general question. This is a historical task, in my opinion. The EU has an option, an opportunity to show that it is a great institution, because we will be able to solve everything else. But AI doesn't have feelings and emotions. And if we don't enrich AI with ethics, then we have lost the fight. Even though everybody has a negative approach to this, there is no other part of the world that would be trying to regulate AI and to take certain steps. And it is really important. Let's have a look at China and at genetics, because in China they might divide the society into those who are politically reliable and those who are not. So what I want to say is that we really need to pay attention to the ethics, and this is also valid for the defense matters. Because in the future, it might be the AI who would be fighting in wars. Okay, just please let's sum it up, because there are so many of us. I just would like to add one last point, and that is that the active person, the person deciding, doesn't have to be the leader, the first one, and this is rather a legal matter.
This is what I wanted to stress. This is an ethical problem, because we were discussing double standards, because in the EU we set high standards, but we don't care what's happening beyond our borders. So what this is about, if we do not protect the internet, if we do not worry about the internet, human rights, so the AI matter is only about the fact that something else is deciding for us, and that is an ethical question. So if you look at humanity, which is facing the problem that its activities are destroying the planet, it's quite similar ethical question. So I think it makes sense to focus on these two agendas in parallel, because future regulation will have an impact on us, and at the same time we have existing technologies which are destroying our planet. So it's the same ethical question, and I think even the response, the answer would be quite similar, based on same principles.
Thank you so much for your question. Yes, it is a very big dilemma, to be honest. I think I really sound like a massive pessimist here, but I question international institutions. The biggest problem at the moment is that how, first of all, when these the codes, like the legislation or things for the, like any future aspect for these things are being decided. First of all, the human rights defenders are not in the decision-making room that often. And the other thing, and the most important thing, is like people who are impacted, like people who are like first-hand impacted by these technologies are absent. I mean, look at like, I mean, what happened in Gaza yesterday. A total blackout. We literally lost touch with our own Amnesty colleagues as well. And because this blackout happened in the occupied Palestinian territories, you don't know the stories of what's really happening to Palestinian people at that point. And then at the same time, the war crimes are justified, so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is like, as long as you do not bring in impacted people and communities on the table, it's really hard to reach a just system that can be implemented in the future.
Luca, you wanted to react? Or
yeah, just to add to what Hajira just said, this has been a long-standing criticism of the AI Act, that the people affected are not in the picture, the people affected by this decision-making. I think when people realized that it was very much too late, because the proposal was already on the table, and it would have meant to change completely the approach. And I don't think there is a mature legislative thought to do that. The other big weakness you can see, and Hajira was hinting at this earlier, is that technical standards are developed by the industry, and that's the way it should be. But in the AI Act, they also have significant impact on fundamental rights. And how do you combine these two things is really not clear. So, I mean, we have seen some early standardization requests that ask the standardization bodies to take into account fundamental rights, but their members are businesses and companies. So, I mean, who is actually going to ensure that is the case? And consider that these technical standards will be basically, they will facilitate compliance to the EU law, so they will be very strongly encouraged. So that is another area after the AI Act is passed, where there will need to be a lot of attention.
Někdo má nějakou další?
Are there more questions from the audience?
Tady paní vepředu.
The lady in the front.
Dobrý den, mě by zajímalo.
Hello, I have a question for Mrs. Monika. How many terrorists were not recognized? That people actually realized that AI did not recognize the terrorists. Well, I think that none, actually, because AI would have been efficient in this, but there is also this aspect that people who are criminals usually are ahead of us. And they usually know that there is this system at the airport, so they go through a different airport. So you are violating passengers' rights, and at the same time terrorists will not go through this airport if they know that the system is there. So I don't know what else to say. The bigger question is, if we want to focus on national security, we know that in China soon there will be one camera per one person, 1 billion cameras in public space. They had roughly 100 million cameras before COVID, and now these cameras have improved, and they can even recognize people wearing masks. So, yeah, we can go in similar direction. And there is also, in China, is regulation regulating AI, and its values must be in line with Chinese socialism. AI values must be in line with the Chinese socialism. So we have different paths to take. It's about values. Any comments from other people? And a question. There is a question here in the audience again.
I just have a small comment. I've been called a terrorist to my face, by the way. Like, I'm not kidding. This has happened. So, you know, this entire thing that Monika stated that, oh, you know, terrorists are going to different airports and stuff is bullshit, literally. But I'm just saying because there's always discrimination embedded into these systems, and it's really hard to get rid of it.
Mě bych se chtěla zeptat, jestli byste mohla...
I would like to ask whether you could
byste zmínila sociální...
develop on that social aspect, that there is a new AI regulation in China, that it must be in line with the social or communist regime. What does it mean in reality? I am sorry I didn't study the act because I was really discouraged, so I can't answer. Maybe you can imagine what it means. Chinese socialism for AI means there is this book by Kai Fu Lee, who was active in China for many years in Google and other companies. It means that socialism is going towards these technologies. So when these are useful, they damaged a whole neighborhood to build an environment for big tech companies. So this can mean anything, but thankfully or unfortunately, I don't know, I didn't read this. And it just was adapted recently, so I will have to study it. I'm sorry. China globally, geopolitically, well, China does not respect our concept of individual human rights. They just think that society has its principle and their social scoring system is natural for them from their point of view. And if we speak about ethics, this is the dilemma that we will have to address, that there are different values and cultures in the world which do not respect our individual doctrine of human rights, and these powers are huge and we cannot neglect them, or they are not negligible in terms of power and security. And there is also this ethical question, which notion of humanity is sustainable, whether are liberal with that we are individuals, because I would say I'm a European, I am a woman, and I have my reasons for it, but then there is a different point of view which will say that our liberal approach is not sustainable because it requires a huge coordination cost, that our liberalism is costly and China is more efficient, and we must find this ethical response in this. But I, as a woman and a European, I say that our approach is better. I would go back to what Hajira has said, whether global consensus means European consensus or world consensus or not. Luca, would you like to maybe respond or not? Maybe we can take another question.
No, of course. I think to go back to the previous point, I'm also not an expert of the Chinese law. I'm busy enough with EU law. But if you just look at the different recommender system TikTok has in the West and in China, it promotes very different views of society, in fact. And that already gives you a hint of what they mean, because our recommender system is an AI system. In terms of global consensus, there has been an effort to build a common understanding between the EU and the US, a list of what we mean with risk, what we mean with trustworthy AI, and this is a discussion that is ongoing. Now, to be honest, there are even too many of these discussions and ethical guidelines going on that no one really looks to enforce. The latest is the G7, this code of conduct that, I mean, they're doing it not clear. It's not clear for what purpose. It's not clear if they will even monitor that companies are following it. I think, as I said before, the AI Act in terms of hard law, it will be a first. even though China has its own, but China has pretty much put itself outside of the world markets, because to do business in China, you have to follow their own rules, and often they violate IP rights. So it's a completely different story. In the West, we can expect the EU to take the lead. And as I was saying before, the Council of Europe Treaty, from the EU point of view, is also a way to put the AI Act as a sort of, as the de facto international standard, even though we cannot expect horizontal legislation coming out from the US anytime soon, simply because that's not their approach. We can expect maybe some more targeted legislation on AI in health in certain states, but a lot of people in the US also look at the EU to sort of regulate this space for them.
Ano, vidím tamhle pána uprostřed.
I see the gentleman in the middle has a question.
Mám pocit, že se ta diskuze
I feel
extrémně negativním
like you are being very negative, that there is the threat of AI and it's dangerous. So you spoke about the airport example and discrimination, AI is deciding yes or no, who is going through or not, or who is being stopped by the police, who will give social benefits or not. Well, then the alternative today are regular people who are often quite biased, they have various motivations, they are often racist, they are often tired, so maybe AI is maybe an opportunity to remove these flaws. I always say that someone must decide in the end, humans must decide in the end, but I think that algorithms might say, for example, that this Roma person is not as dangerous as usual Czech racist thinks so, or that this person is not as dangerous as someone might think, that it's not so risky. So I think that maybe these algorithms must be built correctly to do their job correctly. I don't think that they are just this risk at 100%. So thank you for this question. I would like to respond. I forgot to say it at the beginning. I am a tech optimist, so I am a fan of technologies. I am just trying to see the risks in human rights. I don't want to have over-regulation because people are able to harm each other with different bias and prejudices. But to wake you up again, it turned out there was a research among American judges who were deciding about conditional release of prisoners from prisons, and they were deciding differently before lunch and after lunch. So it depended on the fact that they were hungry or not. I don't know what were the results actually, but one of the options was quicker and did not require any justification. So they were opting for this quick decision. So this was all based on human factor. And these large language models show that they just replicate human errors. That was the example from the Netherlands mentioned by Hajira. I just said it in Dutch. Maybe do not correct me if you speak Dutch. And that was about double nationality people or single parents. They were discriminated based on those factors because this was also happening before in the previous sample. So people were also biased before and discriminating on that before. And that algorithm and AI was just repeating those systems and those errors and just increase that pattern. So I think that machines can be better than people, and this is what we want from machines. us now that we have them. But now these machines are just replicating our errors and our stereotypes, and these machines are very complex. The neural networks are complex, so that it's difficult to erase these errors. And these systems will be deciding and will be maybe more just in justice than people. One last comment, please, regarding this question. Hajira would like to say something, or Luca? Both of you, but please be quick.
Is it me
Yeah,
or
I can be very quick. So two quick points. Sorry, it arrives with a like. So, one, we should, when we consider risk, we should consider also the risk of not adopting the technology. So what will happen if we don't use it? And this sometimes is we forget. And secondly, what you said before about the Dutch scandal actually had human review, and the AI Act gives a lot of importance to human reviewing the result of the system. But what happens when the people reviewing the decision making trust the system more than the people that are being affected by the decision? And that is also a form of bias that is very powerful, and that we will have to consider when in our everyday life. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Luca raised a brilliant point. Like, as long as you don't bring impacted communities into the picture, it's very difficult. I think you did mention Roma, like you gave an example of, So Serbia has a social registry system for welfare benefits, and Roma are the most impacted and fearing the first-hand brunt of that system, by the way. So what I mean, there is always this coded bias and data sets that are out there. And even when we are talking about large language models, or even content moderation, for instance, Facebook failed miserably in Myanmar. Facebook failed miserably in Ethiopia. Right now, with the ongoing issue happening in Gaza and Israel, we are seeing a lot of fanning of hate speech and lots of problematic and hateful Islamophobic, anti-Semitic content online. And it's also because, how do you really feed the global languages also into these systems? How do you bring in the perspective of such a massive global community into the system? For 10 minutes, we got bogged down talking about China, which is fine in its own way. But at the same time, we need to, really address these double standards, because even when you're looking right now, we're calling for ban on harmful AI exports, because we have seen that EU companies are exporting technologies in Israel, and especially in occupied East Jerusalem, in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Every 15 meters, every 15 meters, there is a surveillance camera which is literally following each and every second of Palestinian lives. So I think first, in the whole global thinking, we need to look at, that it's not just how China and Russia are bad, but at the same time, how in the West, which is actually pioneering these technologies and these legislations, and how a lot of these big tech companies are in London or Silicon Valley whatsoever, are at the root of boosting these systems and creating these systems. But as long as you don't bring in people from the global majority who are mostly marginalized, or people who are at the brink of poverty who are marginalized, homeless people who are marginalized into the picture to talk about how to really nurture or create these systems, what is the best way to look into them, I'm kind of a pessimist, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you for your all your comments. This is the end of our debate. Before we wrap this up, my task is to sum it all up in 3 points, which is quite complicated because this was a large debate. And I would say that the topic of AI regulation is a political and conflict of values where all the leftist and right-wing conflicts are manifested, and at the same time there is this geopolitical conflict which is making it even more difficult because we must see how it is happening, what's happening outside, and if human rights are eroded elsewhere, it's happening here as well. And then the second point is inclusion. We must include marginalized people. They must be seated around the table when we are discussing AI, how it's going to decide. But we should not be too West-centric in our point of view on AI and when we are discussing global topics, because we have this tendency to export our values elsewhere. And we think that this is correct, but what we often export is often not in line with the declared values of human rights. And I have nothing else to say. I think that we can wrap this up, but two more invitations. First thing, Hajira from Amnesty International has brought a 2-minute video in which she explains the AI Act and how we can look at it from a human rights point of view. So you can stay and watch this video afterwards. And the second comment is, I have it on paper here, but well, I'd like to invite you to our next panel, which will focus on AI development, and it starts at 7:30. So this would be all. I'd like to thank all our panelists, our guests who are here with me in the studio. I'd like to thank Luca to Brussels. So good luck and thank you very much and bye.
Thank you.
A teď teda ještě nevím, jestli to bude produkce nebo kdo pustí to video.
Artificial intelligence. Inteligencia artificial.
Are they developing the ability to wipe out humanity?
What if all the apocalyptic hype about AI is distracting us from much more pressing issues? Right now, decisions about how much power AI systems and those controlling them should have are being made in the European Union, where the landmark Artificial Intelligence Act is moving closer to becoming one of the world's first laws governing AI. Included in the legislation is facial recognition technology. These AI-driven systems capture our biometric data by analysing CCTV footage against images scraped from places like social media, often without our knowledge or consent.
Any interference with the right to privacy must be necessary and proportionate, and the use of facial recognition for mass surveillance is neither necessary nor proportionate. Other issues are, of course, with the right of assembly, with freedom of expression, right to protest. Mass surveillance has a very big chilling effect on societies, because if you know that you're being constantly surveilled, that will inevitably change your behavior.
Facial recognition is often used in conjunction with AI-driven profiling and risk assessment systems.
A lot of these systems are used in very high-stakes areas, such as policing, such as welfare provision, migration management. They are not used for improving people's access to welfare. They're used to cut down costs, to make processes more efficient.
Despite their enormous potential to cause harm, the European Commission's proposal fails to adequately regulate facial recognition and automated assessment systems in a way that effectively protects our rights. So what might legislation that does protect our rights look like?
Put human rights at the heart of legislation. Certain things shouldn't be allowed to be used in our public. Strong safeguards for use of technologies, including to assess if technologies have human rights impact, and to empower people to challenge AI-made decisions, to be able to complain, to go to court where necessary.
So instead of focusing on the future of AI, we should really be concerned with how AI-driven systems are already impacting our lives in ways we might not be aware of.
Takže to už je opravdu všechno a přeji vám hezký večer.